If you got to ask God a question about the nature of reality, especially when it comes to retention and the sexual energy that you can transmute, what would you ask him? Would you assume that he would tell you to retain forever and be a monk? Or would he tell you to, be entirely a slave to your hedonistic desires and take all of the impulses that you can anytime you see a screen or anytime you see a woman? Because sometimes if you frame the question or the idea of semen retention, sexual alchemy, any of these practices from a perspective of God or the highest source of consciousness, not from our perspective as humans as to what God is through the religious lens, but through a much higher lens. So transcending the concept of religion entirely and all the dogma that we have been brought into our head, it's even impossible to even conceive of an idea of God outside of that, because it's still tied to our human language. It's still tied to our perception to interact with all of the senses, our visual field as well. And if you were to ask God what retention really is, he would most likely, he or she would most likely, honestly, tell you to do whatever the hell you want. Do what your heart desires, because if you feel that you need to retain for the rest of your life and that there's some deep reason, whether it's trauma or circumstances going on in your world, in your reality, that make you very, very inclined to feel that you should be retaining for the rest of your life and never release ever again, or go on a celibacy streak or sexual alchemy streak for a year, there's most likely a reason for that. And if you're in the phase where you can go get women and go release on a daily basis every 3 hours, go with that. But usually the emotion that comes after that, whether it's a feeling of liberation, peace, happiness, is an indication of whether or not you should keep doing it. Because the idea of shame, especially after you release or post-nut clarity, is actually counterintuitive to you wanting to either stop that behavior or continue it. And this is just based on what some psychotherapists and psychologists say, is if you literally feel shame and guilt after you release, whether it's through the hub or whether you do it with a partner, whatever you're doing, if you feel that shame and guilt, that negative emotion is then going to cause you to relapse again, because it's the same emotion that makes you feel bad and shameful that's then going to cause you to relapse again, because now you feel shameful. In order for you to not feel shameful, you need to then have that high rise of dopamine in your brain through obviously the sexual activity. So it's an interesting thought experiment when you really frame it outside of the simple dogma that people like to say when it comes to just retaining forever the rest of your life, never release, or simply, kind of having it from a I don't know how to say that word, puritanical, like a purist view, like purity culture. I don't know how to say that word. That's weird. But literally, if you view it from that perspective, to each their own, but sometimes that also is limiting your consciousness in the same way as somebody who's also just constantly releasing all the time. And if there was a higher consciousness, he most likely would tell you to have some sort of balance and keep it ma'at, because if you're not, you're going to just still fall victim to having the extremes on the pendulum and not really being able to see the whole picture.